It says solving by square roots. Now I want you to circle something that's really important. Circle this first line. It is important to note that there is no term for x to the first power, or just x. So, on example 1, what kind of polynomial is this? Ignore the equals 0. Just look at the polynomial part of it. How many terms is it? 2. So what do we call that?
Binomial.
Binomial. And the largest exponent is squared. So it's a... Come on, you guys.
No, it's
Quadratic.
It's quadratic. We should know that. X squared is quadratic. We know this looks like a parabola, right? But what's missing in the middle is typically how many terms is a quadratic? 3. Typically it's ax squared plus bx plus c, right?
Yeah.
So what this means is we're missing the x in the middle. That's really important. That makes our lives easier, actually, when the x is not in the middle. Next class we'll learn what to do if there is an x in the middle. But for today, we can kind of just sit in Algebra 1 world. If I want to solve this equation, we can just do SADMAP. So undo order of operations, undo the adding and subtracting, undo the multiplying. How do we undo x squared?
Square root.
Square root it, right? Those are inverses of each other. So we can just go back to Algebra 1 for this problem. So to get x by itself, to solve for x, the first thing I'm going to do is add over that 12. So we separate the constant from the x term, and the x squared term, I should say. There is no x term in this problem. Now, if we're trying to get stuff away from x, what's currently in the way? The 3. So how do I undo that? Divide by 3, divide by 3. So that gives me 4 equals x squared. Now the last SADMAP, we undo exponents in parentheses. So how do I undo an exponent? Yeah, we undo the square with a square root. So therefore we get, I'm going to write this backwards, x equals 2 and
-2.
-2. Do you remember plus or minus 2?
Oh, that's right.
So that is your answer. There's actually 2 answers. You could write it separately if you wanted. You can say x equals 2 and x equals -2. That's what that plus or minus means. Do you remember why there's 2 answers when we square root something?
The squares can be always.
Yeah, so if we square something, what is 2 squared? 4. But what is -2 squared?
4.
It's also 4. So when we square root 4, we have to give all numbers that when you square them, you get the answer 4. We're going back to where we came from, okay? Now what I want you to do, if you remember, actually go ahead and get out your calculator. I want everyone to do this. So get out your calculator, go to y equals, and clear out what's ever in there. Now, let's graph this quadratic. So, obviously we're not going to type in 0 equals. I just want you to type in the polynomial part of it. So 3x squared minus 12. Now, just so we're all on the same page, let's do Zoom 6 in case any of your Zooms got weird. Now, what do you notice about this parabola?
Stretched.
Where does it cross the x-axis?
2 and 2.
Where does it cross through the x-axis?
2.
2 and -2. Remember, the solutions to a polynomial are the x-intercepts of the graph. Because we're trying to find out when the polynomial equals what? 0. AKA, that is the x-axis. The x-axis is when y equals 0, right? So we also call these the zeros. Remember, sometimes we call them the zeros. The solutions to a polynomial are the x-intercepts. So it's really easy to check your work. So let's do example A, the practice one here. So once again, there's no x term. There's only an x squared. So we can just do SADMEP. So let's undo adding and subtracting and add over the 5. That gives us 3x squared equals 24. Next we divide by 3, so that's going to give me 8. How do you undo x squared? Square root, x equals, now immediately put plus or minus before you forget. There's always going to be 2 answers when you square root something. Now the square root of 8 is not simplified. Now we've done this year. In fact, we spent like 2 weeks on it. Do you remember how to simplify a square root?
Separate them.
What's a perfect square that divides out of 8?
4 and 2.
4, right? 4 is a perfect square.
Oh, yeah,
so you can kind of go back to old school geometry, factor tree if you want. So 4 times 2, right? 4 is
2 and 2.
2 and 2. So there's a perfect square that comes out of the square root. So the 2 comes out front, and then there's a single 2 that stays inside. So our final answer here, no decimals, because the square root of 8 is a decimal. We want to keep it as a simplified square root. So 2 square root of 2. Well, blast from the past. I told you stuff's going to come up from last semester quite a bit. So now if you don't, I just explained that. Just a second. So if you're not sure, you can do the square root of 8. Square root of 8. What is the decimal? About 2.8, right? And then if I wanted to check my answer, 2 square root of 2, it should be the same decimal. It's the same thing. It's just a simplified version of it, okay? Now, one last thing I want to do real quick. Let's check our answers. What decimal did I say this is about? About 2.8-ish. So really our answer is plus or minus like 2.8, okay? So let's go back to the original problem and get out your calculator. And let's graph this parabola and see if it crosses the x-axis at 2.8. Now, in order to graph this, it has to be set equal to 0. So if I want to type this in my calculator, what do I need to do so that I can type it into y equals, and it's the polynomial is equal to 0?
Minus 19.
Yeah, so minus this 19 over to the left side. So that's going to give me negative 24, right? So you have to get it all to one side equal to 0 in order to put it in your calculator. So go into y equals and clear out the one we just did. And type in 3x squared minus 24. Because really we're trying to find out where does the polynomial equal 0, aka the x-axis. So go ahead and graph. Now, does that look like it could be 2.8?
Yeah.
Yeah, it looks pretty darn accurate, so chances are we're probably right. But you actually learned how to do this right before Christmas. How do you find... Now, you can't use the table because those are going to be whole numbers. This is a decimal. But we did learn how to find an x-intercept. Remember, the whole test right before Christmas was how to do this stuff. Second trace.
0.
Which one of those words means x-intercept? 0. We're trying to find out when does it equal 0. And remember the left-right guess. So find your cursor, move it to the left of the x-intercept, and then pass the x-intercept up, go to the right of it, and then guess right smack dab in the middle, negative 2.8.
Wow.
So if you're not sure, that's something that's in your toolbox, in your brain, that we've learned how to do before. You can always check it on your calculator. Okay? Now I want you to do example B on your own. So you should have added 8. How many of you added 8 first?
Yes. Me.
So add 8, we get negative 4. And then we divide by 4. Now you don't need the parentheses anymore if there's nothing else. So you don't need to write the parentheses anymore if the 4 is gone. And then we are going to, now that the parentheses are, we don't need those anymore, we add the 2 over. That gives me x squared equals 1. You know what to do next? How do you want to do a square?
Square root.
Square root it. What's the square root of 1?
1.
And
Negative.
And 1. Oh, crap.
negative 1. Two answers. You can write it out separate if you want. You can say x equals 1 and x equals negative 1. Now, it seems like a simple error, but if you forget one of them, you're totally forgetting an x-intercept. There's two answers. Now, let's double check this one. So, let's go into our calculator and go to y equals. Now, what would I need to do here to get this so I can put it in my calculator?
Plus 12.
Yeah, we need to get it set equal to 0. So just add that 12 over to the constant negative 8. So if I add 12 over, what's that going to be?
4.
That's going to be a plus 4 equals 0. So now I can type that in, 4 parentheses x squared minus 2 parentheses plus 4.
We were right on the money.
And then graph it, and it crosses the x-axis at 1 and negative 1. Boom. How long does that take to check your work? Like 15 seconds, and you're guaranteed the right answer. You can check your work before you turn in your test and see if it's right. Okay? I'm going to end right there for today. Don't lose these. We'll finish the rest of this up next class.